A man shoved a foreclosure notice through the door of a father still holding his crying infant at 2 in the morning, and that father didn't flinch. He just folded it in half, tucked it under a stack of unpaid bills, and whispered to that baby, "Not tonight, son, not tonight." That same week, a woman who owned a billion-dollar empire drove 4 hours through a rainstorm to hide in a stranger's broken farmhouse because the people closest to her had decided she was no longer worth keeping. 2 people, both convinced they had nothing left to offer anyone. They were both wrong. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels. And if it moves you, subscribe. Because this one goes all the way. The baby wouldn't stop crying. That was the first thing, the only thing that mattered to Daniel Reeves at 11:47 on a Tuesday night in November. Not the stack of envelopes on the kitchen table. Not the blinking voicemail light on the old landline that hadn't delivered good news in over a year. Not the sound of wind pushing through the gap in the mudroom door he kept meaning to fix. Just the baby. Just Noah. Daniel walked him in slow circles across the cracked linoleum floor of the kitchen. One hand under the boy's head, the other pressed flat against his back, feeling every shudder and gasp. 6 months old. Born in April to a woman named Christine, who had kissed Daniel on the cheek one morning in June, told him she was going to pick up diapers and never come home. He never went after her. He understood. He just wished she'd taken less of herself when she left because Noah had her eyes. And every time the boy looked up at Daniel, it was both the best and the worst thing he'd felt since his wife Rachel died 3 years ago in a car accident on Route 9, coming home from a parent-teacher conference for their daughter Sophie. Sophie was 6 now. Asleep upstairs with her stuffed elephant tucked under her arm, blissfully unaware that her father was slowly coming apart at the seams. "Come on, bud," Daniel whispered to the boy. "Come on. It's okay. It's okay." It wasn't okay, but you say what you have to say. He'd learned that from Rachel. The knock came just after midnight. Not a polite knock. Not the kind neighbors use when they want to borrow something. This was 3 slow, deliberate knocks, the kind that said, "I know it's late and I don't care." Daniel froze. Noah kept crying. He carried the baby to the front window and looked out through the old curtain. Rain was hammering the porch. Lightning flickered somewhere over the ridge. In the driveway, his driveway, the one with the cracked concrete and the dead floodlight he'd been meaning to replace for 8 months, sat a black SUV. Not just black, gloss black like something out of a magazine. Clean and enormous and almost offensive in the middle of his drowning little property. He didn't recognize it. He almost didn't answer. He almost walked back into the kitchen, put Noah in his bouncy seat, and pretended no one was there. That was the smarter move. That was what every rational part of his brain told him to do. But he answered. And later, many months later, he would look back at that exact moment and understand that his whole life bent in a different direction right there. He opened the door. She was already watching him when he did. Sitting in a sleek black wheelchair at the edge of the porch, rain dripping from the roof's edge, inches from her face, a woman in her early 30s looked up at him with an expression that was almost impossible to read. Not afraid. Not apologetic. Not the way people usually look when they show up at a stranger's door past midnight. She looked evaluated. Like she was already deciding whether he was worth what she was about to ask. She was beautiful in the way that certain things are not soft, not warm, but precise. Dark hair pulled back, a structured coat that probably cost more than Daniel's truck. Hands folded in her lap. Posture like someone who had trained herself to take up exactly the right amount of space. "Mr. Reeves," she said. Her voice was low, controlled. Rain behind her, lightning somewhere distant, and she said his name like she'd said it 100 times before. "Yeah," he said. He was still holding Noah, who had gone quiet, startled maybe by the sudden cold air. "That's me. My name is Victoria Lang." She paused. Not for drama. Just because she always seemed to choose her words like she was signing contracts. "I understand you have a room. I'd like to rent it." Daniel stared at her. "It's midnight," he said. I'm aware. In a rainstorm. Also aware. Noah grabbed Daniel's collar with one small fist. How do you know my name? Daniel asked. I spoke with your neighbor Frank Alderman 2 days ago. He mentioned you'd been considering renting the back room to cover your mortgage. He gave me your name. Frank, of course. Frank couldn't keep a secret if you paid him, and he probably had been paid. Or at least charmed. Victoria Lang looked like someone who had never failed at charming anyone when she actually tried. Frank had no business telling anyone that, Daniel said. No? She agreed. He didn't. But here I am. There was a silence. Wind moved through the oak tree at the edge of the property. The SUV sat in the driveway, engine off, and Daniel noticed there was no driver, or if there had been, they were gone now. Are you alone? He asked. Yes. Where did your driver go? I drove myself. She said it flatly without explanation. Her wheelchair had a slight lean to the right, and now that he was looking closely, he noticed her left hand gripped the armrest more tightly than her right. There was something she was managing physically. Something that cost her more effort than she showed. Look, Daniel said. I don't know you. I can't just... I know. She looked down at Noah for the first time, just for a second, then back up at Daniel, and something shifted in her face. Something small, barely visible, like a door opening 1 inch in a room that was otherwise locked. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to let me pay you 6 months of rent tonight in cash so you can keep your farm. Daniel felt the floor tilt slightly under him. He hadn't told Frank how bad it was. Not specifically. Not the number. How much do you know about my situation? He asked, and he didn't bother keeping the edge out of his voice. Enough, she said. And I'm not here to make you feel ashamed of it. I'm just here because I need a place where no one can find me. She looked at him steadily. And apparently, Mr. Reeves, you need someone who can make sure that doesn't happen to your children. He almost told her to leave. He rehearsed it in his head. Thank you, but no. I don't know you. This isn't what I'm doing. He rehearsed it clearly. Completely. And then Noah grabbed his collar again, and Daniel thought about the notice in the kitchen. The one folded under the unpaid bills. The one he hadn't shown Sophie because she was 6 years old and didn't need to be afraid of anything yet. How much? He asked. She told him. He was quiet for 4 seconds. Then he stepped back from the doorway and said, Come inside. The back room had been Rachel's sewing room. He hadn't changed much since she died. There was still a basket of fabric scraps in the corner, still a small shelf of books she'd never finished. He'd cleared the sewing table and set up a bed and a dresser, but the room still smelled like her some layering of cedar and lavender that no amount of airing out seemed to reach. He stood in the doorway while Victoria moved through the room, quietly assessing. She didn't say anything about the fabric scraps. She didn't comment on the photos he'd missed, taking down 2 of them, small, tucked in the corner of the window frame. Rachel on a summer afternoon. Rachel holding Sophie as a newborn. Victoria looked at them once. Then she turned to Daniel. The room is fine, she said. I don't need much. There's a half bath across the hall. I'll make sure it's... I can manage, she said, not rudely, but definitively. He showed her where the towels were. He showed her the kitchen and where the coffee was kept, and told her Sophie woke early, usually around 6, and had a habit of asking strangers very direct questions. Victoria almost smiled at that. Almost. I'll manage, she said again. He left her there and went back to Noah, who had started fussing again, and he stood in the kitchen for a long time after the house went quiet, the SUV still in his driveway, the cash in an envelope on the kitchen table, the foreclosure notice still tucked under the bills, like something that no longer quite had the same power it had 2 hours ago. He didn't know who Victoria Lang was. He found out at 2:17 in the morning when Noah finally fell asleep, and Daniel sat down with his phone. He typed her name. The results came back instantly. Victoria Lang, 33. Founder and CEO of Lang Technologies, a Fortune 500 firm, valued at $4.2 billion. Named one of Forbes' most powerful women in business for 3 consecutive years. Paralyzed partially in a private accident 18 months ago. Currently embroiled in a board dispute over executive leadership. He scrolled further. There were photos, press events, conference stages, magazine covers. Victoria Lang behind a podium standing. Victoria Lang in a power suit commanding. And then the more recent ones, grainy distant, the kind that got taken without permission. Victoria Lang leaving a courthouse, her wheelchair barely visible beneath a crowd of attorneys. The most recent article was from 11 days ago. The headline read, Lang Technologies, CEO, reportedly missing. Board set to vote on emergency leadership transition. Daniel set his phone down. He looked at the hallway that led to the back room. He thought about what she had said on the porch. I need somewhere no one can find me. And then he thought with a kind of weariness that comes not from exhaustion, but from having seen enough of life to recognize something true when it arrives soaked in rain on your front porch at midnight. She hadn't run from weakness. She had run from people who had decided she was weak. There was a difference. He didn't know yet what the difference would cost him. He didn't know what was coming. The quiet mornings, the gradual changes, the slow catastrophic collapse of every wall 2 damaged people had ever built to keep the world at a safe distance. He just knew that the house was warm. Noah was sleeping. Sophie would wake at 6, and for the first time in a long time, there was someone else breathing in the hallway. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. He didn't sleep, not really, but he lay there in the dark and listened to the rain pull back from the roof, and he thought, whatever this is, it just started. He was right. He just had no idea how far it would go, or what it would cost both of them before it was over. Sophie found her first. That was not a surprise. Sophie found everything. First lost socks, dead beetles in the windowsill, the one loose floorboard in the hallway that made a sound like a sick duck when you stepped on it. She was 6 years old and moved through the world like a small, relentless detective who had decided that nothing would remain unexplained on her watch. Daniel was at the stove at 6:15. Noah in the bouncy seat on the floor, coffee half made, when he heard his daughter's voice coming from the hallway. "You're in the sewing room," Sophie said. A pause. Then Victoria's voice carefully measured, "Yes." "That was my mama's room." Another pause. Longer this time. "I know," Victoria said quietly. "Your father told me. I hope that's all right." "He doesn't go in there much," Sophie said. "He stands at the door sometimes, but he doesn't go in." Daniel closed his eyes for a second. He hadn't known Sophie had noticed that. "I'll take good care of it," Victoria said. "You're in a wheelchair," Sophie said. Not cruel, just observational, the way 6-year-olds state facts about the world before anyone has taught them to be embarrassed about noticing. "I am," Victoria said. "Does it hurt?" "Not anymore." "Did it used to?" Sophie. Daniel appeared in the hallway, spatula still in hand, giving his daughter the look, the one that meant, "We've talked about this, we respect people's privacy." Sophie looked back at him with the expression that meant she understood the rule, but reserved the right to find it inconvenient. Victoria was in her doorway, dressed already dark slacks. A charcoal blouse, hair pulled back with a precision that seemed to require no effort, even though Daniel suspected it required a great deal of it. She was looking at Sophie the way you look at something that surprises you. Not uncomfortable, just recalibrating. "It's fine," Victoria said, glancing up at Daniel. "She's just curious." "She's relentless," Daniel said. "There's a difference." Sophie looked between them. Both decided the adult conversation was less interesting than the new person and turned back to Victoria. "Do you want breakfast? Dad makes eggs. He only knows how to make eggs." "That's not entirely," Daniel started. "And sometimes toast," Sophie added generously. Victoria looked at the little girl for a long moment. Something moved through her expression. Something that came and went too fast for Daniel to name. Then she said, "Eggs sound fine." "Thank you, Sophie." Sophie nodded satisfied and marched back down the hallway toward the kitchen, like she'd just successfully completed a diplomatic mission. Daniel stayed in the doorway a moment longer. "Sorry about her." "Don't be," Victoria said, and she meant it. He could tell she meant it even though she'd already looked away. The first week was careful. That was the word for it. Careful. Everyone moving through the house with a kind of deliberate awareness, the way people do when they're sharing space with someone they haven't figured out yet. Victoria was up before everyone. She was quiet in a way that wasn't passive. It was active, intentional, like she had spent years perfecting the art of occupying a space without burdening it. She made her own coffee. She stayed in her room most of the morning. She appeared at meals, ate what was offered without complaint, and answered Sophie's questions in the short, honest way that Daniel noticed his daughter responded to, better than the patient, careful answers most adults gave her. Sophie asked Victoria why she didn't walk. Victoria said, "My legs don't work the way they used to, after an accident." Sophie asked, "Can they fix it?" Victoria said, "They're not sure." Sophie thought about that for a moment and said, "My mama died in a car accident." Then she picked up her fork and went back to eating. Victoria was very still for a moment. Then she looked at Daniel across the table. He didn't say anything. He just shrugged one shoulder the way you shrug when you've accepted something you didn't choose to accept. Victoria looked back at her plate. She didn't offer condolences. She didn't say, "I'm so sorry," in the hollow, reflexive way most people did. She just sat with it. Sat with the weight of what Sophie had said, let it mean something, and somehow that was the right thing to do, even though she hadn't tried to make it right. Daniel noticed that. He noticed more things about her as the week passed in spite of himself. That she held her coffee cup with both hands, even when only one was necessary. That she read at night. He could see the light under her door, but he'd never seen a book come out of her bags. That she had a phone she checked with the intensity of someone waiting for news they were terrified to receive, and she always turned it face down when he walked into the room. And he noticed that she never asked him for anything, not once. Not a favor, not a hand with the door, not help getting something from a shelf. She solved every problem quietly and independently, and if she couldn't solve it quietly and independently, she simply did without it. He understood that. He recognized it, the particular pride of someone who had learned the hard way, that needing things from people gave them power over you. He just hadn't expected to recognize it in a billionaire. The change started on a Thursday. Daniel had been up since 4 with Noah, who was cutting a tooth and furious about it. By the time Sophie needed to leave for school, he was running on about 90 minutes of sleep, and it showed. He'd put Sophie's lunchbox in the fridge instead of her backpack. He'd put his keys in the freezer, which he only discovered after 10 minutes of searching. He got Sophie to the bus with 30 seconds to spare, came back inside, and stood in the kitchen with Noah against his shoulder, and genuinely could not remember what he'd been about to do. "Sit down," Victoria said. He turned. She was in the kitchen doorway, coffee already made. She'd refilled the pot without being asked, holding a mug out toward him. "I'm fine," he said. "You put your keys in the freezer," she said. He took the coffee. He sat down at the kitchen table, Noah still against his shoulder, and drank half the mug before he said anything. Victoria stayed in the doorway for a moment, then moved to the other side of the table, not close, not presumptuous, but present. Like she was deciding something. "Can I hold him?" she said. Daniel looked up. She was looking at Noah with an expression that was hard to read, careful, guarded, but underneath it, something that looked almost like hunger. The kind that people try to cover because wanting something badly makes you vulnerable to not getting it. "Yeah," Daniel said. "Sure." He transferred Noah carefully. Victoria took him with both arms, adjusted. Her grip settled the boy against her chest with a steadiness that surprised him. She'd done this before, or something like it, some experience with small physical fragility that lived in her hands, whether she wanted it to or not. Noah looked up at her. He didn't cry. He grabbed her finger instead. Victoria looked down at that tiny fist wrapped around her finger, and for about 4 seconds her face completely gave way. Whatever she had built there, the precision, the control, the careful architecture of someone who had decided a long time ago not to want things she couldn't have it cracked. Just for 4 seconds. Just enough. Then she pulled it back. But Daniel had seen it. He didn't say anything. He just drank his coffee and let her hold the boy. And the kitchen was quiet, except for the wind outside, and the small sounds Noah made when he was content. And Daniel thought, there is something in this woman that is very old and very hurt, and she has absolutely no intention of letting me see it. He thought she already let me see it. Gag. On Friday he came home from the hardware store to find Victoria in the kitchen. Not sitting at the table. Actually in the kitchen at the counter with the contents of his refrigerator arranged around her in some kind of order that he didn't immediately understand. "What's happening?" he said. "You have 2 aging sweet potatoes, a can of coconut milk, some vegetable broth that expires next week, and half an onion," she said without looking up. "I'm making soup." "You don't have to." "I know I don't have to." She said it without irritation, just clarity. "Sophie told me she hasn't had homemade soup since—" She stopped. Didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Daniel set his bag down. He stood there for a moment watching her navigate the kitchen with a focus that was almost aggressive, the way she moved the chair, the way she reached without asking. The way she managed every constraint of the space without making the constraints the point. "You cook," he said. "My grandmother taught me," she said. "Before I had people who cooked for me." She said the last part dryly, like it was a joke she didn't fully find funny. "Do you miss it? Having people who—" "I miss some things," she said. "Not that." She glanced at him sideways. "Go check on Noah. I've got this." He almost argued. Then the smell of the onion hitting the pan reached him, and he decided he would check on Noah. Dinner that night was the best meal that kitchen had produced in 3 years. Sophie ate 2 bowls. Noah, who had been upgraded to soft solids, seemed genuinely offended that anyone had ever given him anything else. Daniel ate quietly and watched his daughter talk with animation about a science project involving volcanoes. And Victoria, who apparently had opinions about the chemical process of baking soda reactions, engaged with Sophie about it with a directness that his daughter absolutely loved because Sophie did not care for being talked down to. Later, when Sophie was in bed and Noah was down and the house was quiet, Daniel stood at the sink washing the bowls, and Victoria was at the table with her phone face up for once working on something. "Where did you learn to handle a baby like that?" he asked. "This morning." A silence. "I practiced," she said. "On who?" Another silence longer. "On a baby I thought I was going to have," she said. "2 years ago. I bought books, took a class." She kept her eyes on the phone. It didn't work out. He didn't ask further. He knew what "it didn't work out" could mean, all the different weights that phrase could carry. "I'm sorry," he said. "You didn't do anything." Still, she was quiet. He kept washing. Then she said almost too quietly, "Ethan, my ex-husband said it was probably for the best, given the accident, given everything." Her voice was completely flat, completely controlled, like she was reading a news summary about someone else's life. "He said I wasn't exactly built for it anymore." Daniel turned off the tap. He turned around. Victoria was still looking at her phone. Jaw set, the kind of stillness that comes from refusing to let something move you, even when it already has. "He said that to you," Daniel said. "Among other things. And you stayed married to him after—" "For 11 more months, yes." She finally looked up. Her eyes were steady, but there was something behind them that was not steady at all. "Because I believed him." The kitchen was very quiet. "You don't anymore," Daniel said. It wasn't a question. She looked at him for a long moment. "I'm working on it," she said. And something in the way she said it, not a confession, not a plea, just a flat, honest report from someone giving themselves a very hard time, made Daniel lean back against the counter and say, "Yeah, I know what that's like." She looked at him. "Rachel, my wife, she always told me I was stronger than I thought," he said. I spent 2 years after she died proving her wrong on purpose, just to feel like I still had control over something. He shook his head. Took me a while to figure out that wasn't strength. That was just stubbornness wearing strength's clothes. Victoria was very still. That's remarkably self-aware for someone who put his keys in the freezer this morning, she said. And Daniel laughed a real laugh, the unexpected kind. The kind that comes out before you've decided to let it, and after a startled second, the corner of Victoria's mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but close, closer than anything he'd seen from her yet. He turned the light off over the sink. She went back to her phone. He said goodnight, and she said goodnight, and he walked down the hall, and he did not let himself think too much about what had just happened in that kitchen. But he did not sleep for a while. And in the back room, the light stayed on past midnight. 2 people. Same house. Same wounds carried differently. And something between them, something neither of them had planned for, neither of them was ready for, had just quietly, stubbornly decided to begin. The town found out about her on a Monday. Daniel hadn't told anyone. He'd said nothing to Frank Alderman, nothing to the guys at the hardware store, nothing to Sophie's teacher when she'd mentioned seeing an unfamiliar car in his driveway at pickup. He'd kept it simple, kept it quiet, and told himself it wasn't his story to tell. But small towns don't wait for permission. It was Greta Paulson who started it. She ran the post office and had a memory like a courthouse archive and a mouth to match. She'd seen Victoria in Daniel's truck when he'd driven into town for groceries the previous Friday. Just once. Just a glimpse. But Greta Paulson only needed a glimpse. By Monday afternoon, Daniel's phone had 3 texts from people he barely talked to, 2 voicemails, and 1 actual visit, his neighbor Carl Whitmore, who showed up at the fence line with a look on his face that was trying very hard to be casual and failing completely. So, Carl said, leaning on the post. Heard you got company. I've got a tenant, Daniel said. He kept his eyes on the fence board he was replacing. That's one word for it. Daniel looked up. Carl raised both hands. I'm just saying what people are saying. And what are people saying, Carl? Carl had the decency to look slightly uncomfortable. That she's some kind of rich woman, big city type. That maybe she's got her hooks in you. That a man in your situation. My situation, Daniel repeated. The farm Danny, the debt. People worry. People gossip, Daniel said. There's a difference. He went back to the fence board. She's a tenant. She pays rent. That's the whole story. Carl left. But Carl leaving didn't mean the conversation left with him. It didn't. It spread. The way things spread in a place where not enough happens fast and with additions. By Wednesday, Daniel had heard 3 different versions of Victoria Lang through 2 different people, none of which were accurate, all of which carried the same undertone. What does a woman like that want with a man like him? He didn't repeat any of it to Victoria. He didn't plan to. But Victoria already knew. He realized it on Wednesday evening when he came inside to find her at the kitchen table with her laptop open and her phone face up, which was new, and an expression on her face that was a few degrees colder than her usual careful neutral. Your neighbor, she said without looking up. Carl Whitmore. He called the county assessor's office today and asked about your property status. Daniel stopped walking. How do you know that? Because I have someone who monitors certain kinds of searches for me. She finally looked up. Someone ran your name and your property through 3 different public databases today. Carl Whitmore's name came back on 2 of them. Why would Carl? He wouldn't, she said. Carl is the front. Someone asked Carl to look. She turned her laptop so he could see the screen. He didn't understand most of what was on it. Searches, timestamps, IP threads, but he understood the name at the top of the chain she'd traced. Marcus Hale. He didn't recognize it. My ex-husband's attorney, Victoria said. And before you ask, yes, they found me. Or they're close to finding me. They've been working outward from New York in a geographic radius for the past 10 days. She closed the laptop with a quiet click. I want you to know that because you should know what you're involved in. Daniel pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. Tell me what I'm involved in, he said. She looked at him for a moment with that measuring look, the one she'd given him on the porch the first night, the one that asked whether he was worth trusting with real information. She must have decided yes. Lang Technologies, she said, has a board of 11 directors. 6 of them want me removed as CEO. They've wanted it since the accident, because I'm no longer what they call optically suitable for the company's public identity. She said those 2 words, optically suitable, with a precise, quiet contempt. My ex-husband, Ethan Hale, holds a board seat and a 12% stake in the company. He and I built it together. He would like everyone to continue believing that. He's been positioned to take over as interim CEO when the board votes, which they're planning to do in 6 weeks. And if they vote without you there, Daniel asked, they can't remove me entirely without a legal challenge, but they can vote to suspend my executive authority, which effectively sidelines me while they build the case to push me out permanently. Night. She paused. I've been gathering evidence of financial misconduct on Ethan's part for the past 8 months. Transactions that run through shell accounts that he controls through a third party. If I can present it properly with the right legal team, I can invalidate his board position entirely and change the vote. And you've been doing this from my back room, Daniel said. Yes. He sat with that. Why here? He said. You're worth $4 billion. You could be anywhere. Some private island, some secure facility. Because no one looks in a place like this, she said plainly. And because everywhere I would normally go, he has eyes. She looked at Daniel steadily. I picked your farm because Frank Alderman mentioned it to the wrong person in a coffee shop, and I happened to be in the car with the right person who overheard it. A pause. I make decisions quickly. It's how I've survived this long. You trusted Frank Alderman's coffee shop conversation to keep you safe, Daniel said. I trusted the fact that your name isn't connected to anyone in my world, she said. I trusted that you needed something real badly enough to let a stranger in without asking too many questions. And I trusted... She stopped, looked down at the table. Something shifted in her posture, slight but visible. I trusted that you looked like someone who understood what it felt like to be in an impossible situation without anyone to help. The kitchen was very quiet. Did I look like that? Daniel said. You were holding a 6-month-old baby in a rainstorm at midnight, and you still opened the door, she said. Yes, you looked like that. Daniel was quiet for a moment. What do you need from me? He asked. She looked up. That question seemed to catch her slightly off guard. Not the offer of help, but the directness of it, the lack of conditions attached. Right now, she said, I need you to be careful about who comes to this property. I need you to tell me if anyone asks questions you weren't expecting, and I need... She stopped, pressed her lips together for a second. I need a few more weeks. Then this is your life again, and I'm gone. He should have said okay. He should have said fine, I can do that. He should have treated it like the practical transaction it was meant to be. Instead, he said, Sophie has her science fair in 3 weeks. She's been wanting to show you the project. She won't say it like that, but that's what the last 4 conversations about sodium bicarbonate have been about. Victoria blinked. I know, she said quietly. She'd be disappointed if you weren't there, he said. Victoria looked away. Her jaw tightened for just a second, that particular tightening that people do when they're deciding whether to feel something or put it somewhere else. I'll see what I can do, she said. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no. The nights were when the walls came down. Not all the way. Not at first. But there was something about the particular silence of the house after both children were asleep. The specific kind of quiet that descends after a day of noise and need and small crises that made complete armor feel exhausting even for someone as disciplined as Victoria Lang. It started because of Noah. 3 weeks and Daniel had what he could only describe as a full system shutdown. He'd been fighting a cold for 5 days, refusing to acknowledge it, and his body finally collected on the debt at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night. He put Noah down, sat on the edge of his bed to rest for 30 seconds, and woke up 2 hours later to silence when there should have been crying. He lurched to his feet, heart already spiking, and went to Noah's room. Victoria was there. She was beside the crib in her wheelchair, Noah against her chest, one hand moving slowly up and down the boy's back in the steady rhythm that Daniel had spent 6 months perfecting. Noah was asleep, completely deeply asleep, with one fist curled under his chin and his breath coming in those long, slow pulls that meant he was all the way under. Victoria looked up when Daniel appeared in the doorway. "He woke up about 20 minutes ago," she said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "You didn't come, so I did." Daniel leaned against the doorframe. He felt hollowed out, sick, relieved, grateful in a way that sat strangely in his chest, because he hadn't let himself feel grateful for another person in a long time. "Thank you," he said. "Go back to sleep," she said. "I'll put him down in a few minutes." "You don't have to." "Daniel." She said his name directly without decoration. "Go to sleep." He went to sleep. In the morning, Noah was in his crib, and Victoria was at the kitchen table with coffee and her laptop, looking exactly as composed as always, and neither of them mentioned it. But from that night forward, something had shifted between them. Something structural, the way weight shifts in a building when you quietly move one wall. They started talking in the evenings, not always about anything significant. Sometimes about Sophie's project, which had grown from a simple baking soda volcano into something involving controlled chemical reactions, and a hand-drawn chart that Victoria had spent an entire Saturday afternoon helping her properly format. Sometimes about the farm. Victoria knew more about agricultural finance than Daniel had expected, and she'd looked through his accounts once without asking, and quietly pointed out 3 expenses he was paying twice through different billing errors, which had saved him over $200 a month. "You went through my accounts," he said when he realized what she'd done. "You were paying for the same tractor insurance through 2 different brokers," she said. "It was bothering me." "You could have asked." "You would have told me it was fine." He thought about it. "Yeah," he said. "Probably." But it was on a Friday night, late 3 weeks after she'd arrived, that it got real. Sophie had gone to bed. Noah was down. Daniel had poured 2 cups of coffee. Neither of them had asked for out loud, but both of them had clearly needed, and they were sitting at the kitchen table in that particular comfortable quiet that had become its own kind of language between them. Victoria's phone buzzed. She looked at it. Something moved across her face, cold and fast like a shadow. She turned it face down. "Ethan," Daniel asked. "His attorney," she said. "Asking if I'm ready to discuss a settlement." "What does a settlement mean?" "It means they want me to sign away my voting shares in exchange for a financial package and a clean exit from the company I founded." She looked at the phone like it was something she could make disappear through stillness. "They're calling it a graceful transition." "And what do you call it?" She was quiet for a moment. "The last time I sat across from Ethan in a room," she said, "I had been out of the hospital for 6 weeks. I was still figuring out what my body could and couldn't do, and he told me—" She stopped, picked up her coffee, put it down without drinking. "He told me that the woman he married had been a certain kind of person, capable, commanding. He said that he didn't blame me for the accident. He said it in the way that people say something when they very much do blame you." Her voice stayed level, absolutely carefully level. "He said maybe this was an opportunity to step back and let the company continue to grow without, and I'm using his exact words, the distraction of your personal situation." Daniel said nothing. He let her talk. "I didn't say anything," she continued. "I sat there in that wheelchair, and I let him talk for 45 minutes about transition plans and optics and board sentiment, and I didn't say one word because I was using everything I had just to sit in that room and not fall apart in front of him." She finally looked up at Daniel. Her eyes were dry. That was somehow the hardest part of it, that they were dry. And then I went back to my apartment, and I sat there for 3 days, and I thought maybe he was right. Maybe I was a distraction. Maybe I was... She paused. Less than I'd been. Imi. You thought that, Daniel said. For 3 days I thought it very seriously, she said. Then I got angry. Anger is more useful than agreement. So you started building the case against him. The next day. Yes. Daniel looked at her across the table. At the precision she wore like a second skin. At the way she held herself even now in a farmhouse kitchen at 11 at night, like she was always prepared to be looked at and judged. And underneath that, underneath all of it, the thing she was still carrying from that room with Ethan Hale. The thing that hadn't fully gone away no matter how much evidence she gathered or how many attorneys she retained. Can I say something? He said. She looked at him warily. You're going to anyway. You know what I think the worst thing he did was, Daniel said. Not the business stuff, not the board manipulation. The worst thing is that he got inside your head, and he's still there. I can see it. The way you hold your shoulders when anyone looks at you too long. The way you apologize for taking up space, and then catch yourself apologizing, and hate yourself for that too. He shook his head. That's not the accident that did that. That's him. Victoria was very still. You don't know me well enough to... I know what it looks like when someone's been told they're less than they are, Daniel said. I watched my wife's parents spend 20 years doing it to her. Real quiet, real polite, but consistent. He met her eyes. And I know what it looks like when someone is still fighting to unlearn it. Something crossed Victoria's face. Not the controlled kind of expression she usually managed. Something that came from further down. I'm not fit for... she started. Don't, Daniel said. She stopped. Don't say that, he said. Not in this house. The silence between them was different now. Not comfortable. Not uncomfortable. Something more charged than either the particular tension of two people standing at the edge of something that neither of them had been looking for, and both of them had needed for longer than they could easily admit. Victoria looked down at her hands. When she looked back up, her eyes were still dry, but just barely. I don't know how to do this, she said. And it was the most unguarded thing she had ever said to him. Maybe the most unguarded thing she'd said to anyone in years. Do what he said. She gestured between them, a small movement encompassing everything: the kitchen, the house, the children sleeping down the hall, the coffee, the conversation, the absence of performance. This, she said. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Neither do I, he said. We're both just here. She looked at him. He looked back. And for once, neither of them reached for the armor. The clock on the wall ticked. Outside, the wind had gone still. Down the hall, Noah breathed in his crib, and Sophie slept with her stuffed elephant, and the house held, all of them held everything the way a house does when it has quietly, without announcement, become a home again. The science fair was on a Saturday. Sophie had been ready since Thursday. She'd packed and repacked her display board twice, checked the jar of baking soda 4 separate times, and delivered a full rehearsal presentation to Daniel, Noah, and Victoria on Friday evening at the kitchen table, with the seriousness of someone preparing to address Congress. Victoria had sat through the entire thing without checking her phone once, which Sophie noticed, and Daniel noticed Sophie noticing. After Sophie finished and took her bow, she always took a bow, had since she was 4. Victoria said, "Your hypothesis statement needs to be tighter. Right now it says, I think the reaction will be bigger with more vinegar. Say instead, I predict that increasing the volume of acetic acid will accelerate the reaction rate." It means the same thing, but it sounds like you know exactly what you're talking about. Sophie stared at her. Acetic acid is vinegar. Vinegar is a solution of acetic acid, Victoria said. Yes. Sophie turned to Daniel with an expression of pure vindication. I told you it was science. You told me it was a volcano, Daniel said. It's a scientific volcano, Sophie said and turned back to Victoria. Can you help me change the board, They stayed up until 9:30 doing it. Daniel put Noah down and came back to find the two of them at the kitchen table, Sophie dictating while Victoria rewrote the hypothesis card in clear block letters, because Sophie had declared her own handwriting unacceptable for public presentation. It was the most ordinary scene in the world, a woman and a little girl bent over a piece of cardboard, and it hit Daniel somewhere quiet and undefended. The way ordinary things sometimes do, when you've been missing them for long enough. He didn't say anything. He just made tea and sat at the other end of the table and let it happen. The science fair went better than it had any right to. Sophie presented to 3 different judges with the confidence of someone who had prepared significantly better than any of her competitors, used the phrase acetic acid twice and reaction rate once, and came away with second place and a ribbon that she held with both hands the entire drive home, like it was something breakable and precious. Victoria sat in the back of Daniel's truck for the drive, which was the first time she'd ridden with both children at once. She was quiet on the way there, quieter on the way back. But when Sophie burst through the front door waving the ribbon and announced to the empty house that she had almost won, Victoria smiled a full one, unguarded the kind that changed her whole face, and said, "Second place at your first real scientific presentation. I'll take it." Sophie beamed. Noah, who understood none of it, clapped his hands anyway. And for about 30 seconds, standing in the front hallway of his broken farmhouse, Daniel Reeves felt something he had nearly forgotten the texture of. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen, a New York number he didn't recognize. He almost let it go to voicemail, would have on any other day, but something made him answer. "Mr. Reeves." The voice was male professional, carrying the specific smoothness of someone who had been trained never to sound hostile even when they were. "My name is Jonathan Price. I'm calling on behalf of Ethan Hale. I believe you have something that belongs to him." Daniel went still. He walked out of the hallway and into the kitchen, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "I think you do," Price said. "Mr. Hale simply wants to ensure that his wife is safe and properly cared for. He's very concerned about her well-being. She's not his wife anymore. Their divorce hasn't been finalized, Mr. Reeves. Technically, legally." "I'm going to stop you there," Daniel said. "You're calling a private number to ask about a private individual who is not your client. I don't know how you got this number, but I'd like you to not use it again." A pause. When Price spoke again, the smoothness had thinned slightly like a coat of paint that wasn't quite thick enough. "Mr. Reeves, I want to be transparent with you. Mr. Hale is aware of your financial situation. He's aware of the status of your property and your outstanding obligations. He has no interest in making your life difficult. He simply—" Daniel hung up. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. Then he walked back into the hallway and found Victoria already looking at him from her doorway, because she had heard his voice change through the door, and Victoria Lang had spent enough years reading rooms to know exactly what that particular kind of quiet meant. "Price," she said. "Yes." She closed her eyes for half a second. When she opened them, they were very clear and very hard. "What did he say?" "That Hale knows about my financial situation. That he has no interest in making my life difficult." Daniel looked at her. "What does that mean, Victoria?" "It means he's positioning," she said. "He won't come after you directly. That creates liability. He'll apply pressure at the edges, threaten the things around you until you want me gone badly enough to make it happen." She said it with the flatness of someone describing a chess move, not because she didn't feel it, but because feeling it without analyzing it was a luxury she couldn't afford. "He's done it before. With suppliers. With former employees. Anyone who gets close enough to me to be useful." "He went after your people," Daniel said. "He went after everyone I needed," she said, "until I didn't have anyone left." She looked at him steadily. "That's why I was alone when I came here. Not because I'm difficult to be around, because everyone learned it was expensive." Daniel leaned against the wall. "I'm not expensive," he said. "You're already on their list, Daniel. They know your name. They know your debt. That's how this starts." Her voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, something that looked almost like guilt. I should have thought more carefully about what I was bringing to your door. You told me what you were bringing, he said. First night, you told me someone was looking for you. I told you I needed to hide. I didn't tell you it would follow you. Would you have left if I'd known the whole thing? She didn't answer. Victoria. Probably not, she said. I didn't have anywhere else to go that wasn't already compromised. She looked at her hands. Which is not your problem, and it shouldn't cost you your farm. It's not going to cost me my farm, he said. You don't know that. No, he said. But I'm not asking you to leave if that's what you're waiting for. She looked up at him quickly, just for a second, a reflex the involuntary kind. And in that second, he saw the thing she kept buried deepest. Not the business, not the board, not even Ethan Hale. Just the simple, devastating expectation of being left. The assumption of it lived in so long, it had become structural. You should, she said quietly. Probably, he said. I'm not. 3 days later, someone filed an anonymous complaint with Child Protective Services. The complaint alleged that Daniel Reeves's living situation was unstable, that he was housing an unknown individual, that there were concerns about the children's environment and supervision. The caseworker, a tired, decent woman named Ms. Farrell, came on a Tuesday morning without advance notice, which was standard procedure. Daniel answered the door with Noah on his hip and flour on his shirt, from the pancakes he and Sophie had been making, and he handled it the way he handled everything. Calmly, factually, let her walk through the house, answered her questions directly, didn't volunteer more than was asked. Ms. Farrell looked at Sophie's room, which was tidy. She looked at Noah's room, which was equipped and organized. She looked at the kitchen, which had food in the refrigerator for the first time in months. She looked at the living room where Sophie was sitting with a library book and acknowledged the caseworker with a polite, confident hello that could only belong to a child who felt completely safe in her own home. Ms. Farrell asked to speak with the other adult in the house. Victoria came out of the back room in a dark blouse, reading glasses she didn't usually wear around. Daniel pushed up on her head, completely composed. She answered Ms. Farrell's questions about her relationship to the household with clear, brief precision. She was a tenant. She had been there 5 weeks. She had no legal relationship to the children. Ms. Farrell wrote things down, nodded, said she saw no cause for concern, and left. Daniel closed the door behind her. He stood there for a moment with his hand on the door. He could feel his heart beating in a way it had no business beating over something that had resolved itself in 45 minutes. But that was the thing about threats to your children. They didn't need to succeed to get inside you. Just arriving was enough. He turned around. Victoria was very still in the middle of the hallway. I'm sorry, she said, low, direct, no qualification around it. Not your fault, he said. It is Daniel. Her jaw was set. It's exactly my fault. This is the edges. This is what I told you he does. She pushed a breath out through her nose. Using your children as leverage. That's... She stopped. Something moved through her face that she didn't fully contain. That's beneath what I thought even he would do. You gave him too much credit, Daniel said. I gave him 11 years of my life, she said. I gave him access to everything I built, and I sat across from him in a hospital room after the accident, and I let him look at me like I was a problem he was calculating how to solve, and I thanked him for coming. She said it with a precise, devastating contempt directed entirely at herself. I thanked him. Stop, Daniel said. I'm telling you the truth about who you're. I know the truth about who I'm dealing with, Daniel said. He crossed the hallway toward her. Not fast, not dramatic, just deliberate. He stopped in front of her and crouched down, so they were at eye level, which he'd never done before, and he looked at her directly. I know you're a woman who built something real from nothing. I know someone took advantage of the worst thing that ever happened to you. And I know you've been punishing yourself for letting him ever since. He held her gaze. But sending a caseworker to my house didn't work, and I'm still not asking you to leave. So whatever argument you're building toward about being too dangerous to be around, about not being worth the trouble, I need you to know that I've heard it, and I disagree. Oui. Gagny. Victoria looked at him. She was very close. This close he could see the thing she worked so hard to keep at distance, the exhaustion of it. Not the physical kind. The kind that comes from fighting the same battle on the inside for so long that you can't remember what it felt like before the fight started. You're very stubborn, she said. I have a 6-year-old, he said. It's adaptive. The tightest, most reluctant, almost smile crossed her face. He stood back up. We're going to call your attorney today, he said. Whatever evidence you've got on Hale's accounts, it needs to move faster, because he just told us he's willing to go after my kids, and that means waiting is over. Victoria straightened in her chair. The almost smile was gone, replaced by something sharper and cleaner, the face she wore when she was working, when the thing she was best at took over, and there was no room left for doubt. I've been ready for 3 weeks, she said. I was waiting until I had everything. Do you have enough? She looked at him. I have enough to start a fire, she said. Whether it burns what I need it to burn depends on a great deal I can't fully control. Then we start the fire, he said. She nodded, one nod firm and decided. She went back to her room. He heard her on the phone within 30 seconds, her attorney voice, the one that was several degrees more precise and several degrees colder than even her usual careful tone. He went back to the kitchen and finished the pancakes that had gone cold, and fed Sophie and Noah, and listened to the sound of Victoria through the wall, that voice that had run board meetings and closed billion-dollar deals, now doing the most important work it had ever done. Sophie looked at the wall, then at her father. Is Victoria okay? She asked. She's fighting for something, Daniel said. Sophie thought about that. Is she going to win? Daniel put a plate in front of his daughter. He thought about everything he'd seen in Victoria Lang over the past 5 weeks. The discipline, the endurance, the particular ferocity of someone who had been underestimated so many times and so completely that they'd turned the anger of it into fuel. Yeah, he said. I think she is. Sophie nodded satisfied and picked up her fork. Down the hall, Victoria's voice stayed steady and clear and utterly without surrender. And Daniel sat at the table with his children and thought about the way she'd looked at him in the hallway, that quick reflex look when he said he wasn't asking her to leave. The one that showed him just for a second the thing all the precision and control and armor was built around. Not arrogance, not coldness, just a woman who had been told in 100 different ways by 100 different people that she was too damaged to deserve something real and had almost believed it. Almost. He thought about that word. Almost. There was a whole life in that word if you were brave enough to live inside it. He poured himself coffee. Outside the window, the November sky was going pale at the edges, the kind of light that doesn't commit to anything but doesn't give up either. The farm sat under it, broken in places, standing in others the way things are when they've taken enough weather. Still standing. That counted for something. That had always counted for something. The call from Victoria's attorney came on a Wednesday morning 3 days after she'd started the fire. Daniel was fixing the mudroom door, the one he'd been meaning to fix since September, when he heard her voice change. Not louder. Victoria never got louder. But there was a quality to the silence between her words that was different, the kind of silence that means something just shifted in a direction that matters. He set down the screwdriver and waited. She came out of the back room 10 minutes later. She stopped in the hallway and looked at him with an expression he hadn't seen on her face before. Not the controlled boardroom face, not the careful farmhouse face. Something underneath both of those. The financial forensics team confirmed the third account, she said. It's enough. It's more than enough. Ethan ran personal expenses through a Lang Technologies subsidiary for 6 years renovation, on his apartment in Paris, payments to a private account, we've now traced to a woman he's been with since before the accident. Legal fees for work that had nothing to do with the company. She paused. His attorney is already aware we have it. Price called my attorney 20 minutes ago asking about settlement terms. Daniel looked at her. What did your attorney say? That we're not interested in settlement, Victoria said. That we'll see them in court. He watched her face while she said it. There was something there, not triumph exactly, something quieter. The particular expression of someone who has been holding an enormous weight for a very long time and has just been told they can set it down. How long until the board vote? He asked. 4 weeks, she said. The legal filing will go in tomorrow. Once it's public, 3 of the 6 directors who were positioned against me have already indicated through back channels that they'll change their votes. They were following Ethan's lead, not their own conviction. When his position collapses, theirs does too. So it's over, Daniel said. She was quiet for a moment. The legal part, she said carefully. Yes, mostly. He understood what she meant by mostly. He didn't push on it. Sophie gets home at 3:15, he said. I was going to make chili tonight. You should stay for dinner. She looked at him. Something moved through her eyes, that quick, unguarded reflex she'd mostly learned to suppress, the one that showed him what was underneath. I'm always here for dinner, she said. I know, he said. I just wanted to say it like it was a choice. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she turned and went back to her room, and he picked up the screwdriver, and outside the November light came down thin and pale on the frozen ground, and the farm breathed around them both. Go. The day Victoria left for New York was a Thursday in December. Sophie found out the night before and went quiet in the particular way she went quiet when something mattered too much for ordinary words. She ate her dinner without the usual commentary. She helped clear the table without being asked. She went upstairs and came back down 20 minutes later carrying something in both hands, her science fair ribbon, the red second-place one she'd been keeping on her nightstand. She walked to Victoria and held it out. For when you're there, Sophie said. So you remember you almost won something. Victoria looked at the ribbon for a long moment. Second place, she said. It's still a ribbon, Sophie said. Victoria took it with both hands. She held it the way Sophie had held it driving home from the fair, like it was breakable, like it was worth being careful with. She looked at Sophie with the full, undefended expression that she'd only started letting through in the last few weeks. I'm going to put this in my coat pocket, Victoria said. So I have it in the room. Sophie nodded, satisfied the way she got when things were handled correctly. Then she stepped forward and hugged Victoria around the middle, quick, firm, the kind of hug Sophie gave when she meant it entirely, and stepped back before Victoria could respond and went upstairs to bed. Victoria sat very still for a moment after Sophie's footsteps faded. Daniel, who had watched all of it from the kitchen doorway, said nothing. He went to the sink and started washing the dinner bowls, and let the moment be what it was. After a while, Victoria came to the kitchen doorway. She's going to be extraordinary, she said. She already is, Daniel said. She gets it from her mother. He said it simply, without grief, the way you say things, when you finally made peace with them enough to speak them plainly. Victoria heard the shift in it and didn't remark on it, which was exactly right. I need to tell you something, she said. Before tomorrow. He turned off the tap and turned around. She was in the doorway, hands in her lap, and she was not performing composure. She was simply composed, which was different. The real thing, not the armor version. He'd learned to tell the difference over 7 weeks of watching her. After the accident, she said, the doctors told me there was significant damage to my lower spine. They said the paralysis might be partial and permanent, or it might improve with time and treatment. They genuinely didn't know. She looked at him directly. They also said that the damage created a very low probability of carrying a pregnancy to term. Not zero, but very low. Daniel waited. Ethan knew this, she said. He knew it from the beginning. And he used it the way he used everything, to make me feel like a diminished version of what I'd been. Like I owed him something for staying. Like I should be grateful. She paused. I want you to know that I no longer believe that. what he said about me, what the accident took. She pressed her lips together for a second. But I also want you to know it as a fact, because you've been honest with me, and I owe you the same. The kitchen was absolutely quiet. Daniel looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Not accusatory, just asking. Victoria held his gaze. "Because I know what you lost," she said. "And I know what you have in those 2 children. And I refuse to let you not know the full picture of who you've been letting into your house." Her voice stayed steady, but something in it had an edge that was not hardness. It was the opposite of hardness. It was the vulnerability of someone saying the truest thing they know. "You deserve to know what this is, and what it might not be able to be." He crossed the kitchen slowly. He stopped in front of her, and he crouched down the way he had in the hallway 3 weeks ago, eye level, and he looked at her. "You know what I haven't had in 3 years," he said. She waited. "Someone who stays in the morning," he said. "Someone who picks up the baby when I'm too tired to stand. Someone who fixes my daughter's hypothesis card and means it. Someone who sits in my kitchen at midnight and tells me the truth about her life, even though it costs her to do it." He held her eyes. "That's what's been missing. Not the other thing. That." Victoria looked at him with an expression that had no name too full for one name too real for anything rehearsed. "Daniel, I'm not asking you to promise anything," he said. "I'm just telling you the truth back. Since you did me the courtesy." She was quiet for a very long time. Outside, the wind moved against the kitchen window. Noah made a small sound in his room and went quiet again. "I don't know how to be in something real," she finally said. "I've been in things that looked real. This is different, and I'm not sure I know how." "I don't either," he said. "I haven't been in anything since Rachel. I've mostly just been surviving." He stood up slowly. "But I think surviving is what you do until you're ready to try something else." She looked up at him. "Is this you saying you're ready?" she asked. "I'm saying I'm not ready," he said, "which is further than I've been in 3 years." Something broke open in her expression. Not dramatically, not with tears, just a slow release, like a fist that's been clenched so long it's forgotten it can open. She exhaled. "That's the least romantic thing I've ever heard," she said. "I'm a farmer who put his keys in the freezer," he said. "Manage your expectations." She laughed. A real one, short and surprised and entirely unguarded, the kind that came from somewhere she didn't usually let people see. And he watched it happen and thought that it was the best thing he'd seen in a very long time. She left the next morning. The black SUV, a different one sent by her attorney's firm, arrived at 8. Sophie had already gone to school, which Daniel had arranged deliberately because he didn't think either Sophie or Victoria would handle a second goodbye as well as they'd handled the first, and he was almost certainly right. He helped carry her bags to the car. There weren't many. She'd arrived with 2 and was leaving with 2 because Victoria Lang did not accumulate things in places she'd planned to stay temporarily. He noticed she'd left the fabric basket in the corner of the back room, exactly where it had been. He didn't mention it. At the car, she turned to face him. Noah was on Daniel's hip, bundled against the cold, looking at the SUV with the intense fascination he brought to all large vehicles. Victoria looked at Noah first. She touched his cheek with 2 fingers, just that brief and careful, and Noah turned to look at her and grabbed her finger the way he had that first morning in the kitchen, with the same complete and uncomplicated trust. She held very still for a moment. Then she released her finger gently and looked at Daniel. "I'll call when I land," she said. "You don't have to," he said. "I know," she said. "I want to." He nodded. She looked at him for a moment, one long clear look, the kind that holds everything that doesn't have words yet. Then she turned and got into the car with the practiced efficiency of someone who had mastered the mechanics of it, and the door closed, and the SUV moved down the cracked concrete driveway and turned onto the road. Daniel stood there with Noah until the car was out of sight. "Duh," Noah said, pointing at the empty driveway. "Yeah," Daniel said. "She's gone for a bit." "Duh," Noah said again, apparently satisfied with this answer. Daniel went inside. The house was quiet in the particular way houses are when someone is no longer in them. Not empty, just different, like a room where a sound has just stopped. He stood in the hallway for a moment. The door to the back room was open. The bed was made. The books were still on the shelf. The fabric basket sat in the corner. He went to make coffee. The board vote happened on a Tuesday 4 weeks later. Daniel watched the news coverage on his laptop at the kitchen table while Noah sat in the bouncy seat and Sophie did homework across from him. The headline came through at 4:17 in the afternoon. Lang Technologies Board votes to retain CEO Victoria Lang. Former board member Ethan Hale resigns amid financial misconduct investigation. Sophie looked up from her homework. "Is that Victoria?" "Yeah," Daniel said. Sophie leaned over to look at the screen. She read the headline with the careful focus she brought to anything involving words, lips moving slightly. Then she sat back. "She won," Sophie said. "She won," Daniel agreed. "I knew she would," Sophie said, and went back to her homework with the certainty of someone who had never seriously considered the alternative. His phone rang 4 minutes later. "I saw," he said when he answered. "We won the vote 8-3, Victoria said. Her voice was different, not louder, not dramatically altered, but there was something in it that hadn't been there before. A lightness, like something had been removed from it. Ethan's legal team is negotiating the terms of his exit. The financial investigation will continue independent of the company. "How are you?" he asked. A pause. "I'm standing in the courthouse lobby," she said. "And I'm—" She stopped. He heard her exhale slowly. "I feel like I've been holding my breath for 2 years, and I just stopped." "Good," he said. "That's good, Victoria." "Sophie's there," she asked. "Right across the table. Can I talk to her?" He handed the phone across to Sophie, who took it with the careful gravity she reserved for important calls and said, "Hello, this is Sophie," because that was how Sophie answered every phone and always had. He watched his daughter's face while she listened. Watched the slow bloom of a smile, not her regular smile, the performance one she used on strangers, but the real one, the one that was all Rachel that lit her whole face from somewhere behind her eyes. "I knew," Sophie said into the phone. "I told Dad." A pause. "Yes, he believed me." She glanced at Daniel with slight skepticism. "Mostly." Another pause. Okay, bye." She handed the phone back. Daniel raised it to his ear. "She's going to be a litigator," Victoria said. "God help us all," he said. She laughed, that real laugh, the one he'd only started hearing in the last 2 weeks she'd been there. Then she said, "I'm coming back next Friday. If the room is still—" "The room is still yours," he said. A silence. Full and warm. "Daniel," she said. "Yeah." "Thank you," she said. Not for the room, not for the practical thing. He could tell by the way she said it, quiet, direct, stripped of everything except what it actually meant. "For not asking me to leave." He thought about everything that sentence contained. All the versions of leaving she'd lived through before she'd arrived at his door in the rain. All the people who had calculated her value and found it wanting. All the years she'd spent building an empire, partly because she had learned early that what you build can't leave you, only people can. He thought about Rachel, who had spent 20 years teaching him that love was not a feeling that happened to you, but a decision you made over and over in the ordinary moments, in the hard ones, in the ones that didn't look like anything special, but were quietly everything. "You stayed," he said simply. That made it easy. On a Friday evening in January, Victoria Lang came back. The same cracked driveway. The same mudroom door fixed, now properly swinging clean on new hinges. The farmhouse with the porch light working for the first time in 8 months because Daniel had finally replaced the bulb. Sophie met her at the door. She didn't hug her this time. She just held the door open and said, We saved you the room. Dad put a better lamp in it." Then she turned and walked back toward the kitchen because the soup was almost done and someone needed to watch it, and she had decided these things without being asked. Victoria sat in the doorway for a moment before she came in. She looked at the house, at the light in the windows, at the sound of Noah making noise somewhere inside, at the smell of something real, coming from the kitchen, at Daniel, standing in the hallway with his arms crossed, and his expression doing the thing it did when he was trying not to show how much something mattered to him. She came inside. She didn't say anything, and neither did he. She moved past him toward the kitchen, and he fell into step beside her, and they went in together to where Sophie was standing at the stove with a wooden spoon, supervising the soup, with the authority of someone who had recently decided she was old enough to be in charge of this, and Noah, in his high chair, was enthusiastically destroying a cracker, and the kitchen smelled like everything good that a kitchen is supposed to smell like. Victoria sat at the table. Daniel sat across from her. Sophie announced that the soup needed 5 more minutes and that everyone needed to be patient. "Please," she was working. Noah threw a piece of cracker in Victoria's direction. She caught it. They looked at each other across the table, Daniel and Victoria, and what passed between them didn't need language. It was simpler than language. It was the thing that lives underneath language, the thing that language was invented to try to get at, and never quite does. Two people who had each been told in different ways by different voices over different years that they were damaged beyond the right to something whole, sitting in a warm kitchen on a Friday evening in January, watching a 6-year-old supervise soup while a baby destroyed a cracker, and the house held all of it without effort. Because that is what homes do. Not the ones made of walls. The ones made of choosing again and again to stay. That was what they had. That was what they kept. And it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.